Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
All right, let's get it done. It's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, y'all, it's David Summers. This is the story of wrestling in America, as told by the Tennessee Stud, whose family started the profession over 100 years ago. Let's step back into the ring and back into time. Let's get wall-to-wall and treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, congratulations. Studcast overnight have become the talk of old school wrestling fans everywhere. Listen, I've kind of known that this has been the deal out there for a long time. You have captured and created a new following all over the world just with the last couple of Studcasts, Stud.
Yeah, it's been kind of amazing to me, man. It's amazing because there's so few wrestling fans around the world, and especially in America, had no idea what was being said by Vince McMahon Jr. or spokesman for his company to Google about how huge wrestling had become compared to the territories it had replaced. And in his first years of operation after killing the territories, and maybe for all the years that he's been in business, all he had to do was say to the information giant Google that his wrestling company was bigger than wrestling had ever been, and they printed it, whether it was true or not. So the Google article about his New Jersey tax problem, which is the one I'm referring to basically in these last two Studcasts, that problem ended what he was saying about wrestling being scripted. That's what it was talking about. And it was a great example of what I'm saying at this point. At the end of the article, when his company had admitted wrestling was scripted, did he or Google make the claim his wrestling was bigger than the sport had ever been? And if not, where did that idea come from? And do you think Google assigned somebody the task of tracking down all the dead territories TV numbers and attendance figures? Or did they just take Vince McMahon Jr.'s word for it?
That's a good point, Stud. Did they do the research to prove that McMahon's company was truly more successful than all the territories and wrestling companies combined in the past?
Right. So, McMahon Jr. was the only major company left in wrestling. And who else was Google going to ask about it, right? Before making that claim that his company was bigger than wrestling had ever been. So where did they get those so-called facts?
I know. Here we go again. I would love to know the answer to that question. So I got a feeling you're going to come up with something.
Well, it's kind of a simple question, Dave. My numbers provided, the ones that I've provided in the last two Studcasts, say that it isn't so, And so Vince, is Vince company, was it really the biggest in attendance and TV audience? Or did the Google people just take his word for it?
Again, I think you're right, and I think you kind of proved that. Well, I think you did prove that last week. Really a fascinating subject, but we've got a great Studcast ahead of us this week for certain. Maybe somebody out there would have an answer for that question in addition to what you've provided. So my question is, where are we going to be riding today, Stud?
Well, we're going to go back, man, to my grandfather Roy's time for our next hidden history lesson that we've been doing the last 6 or 8 Studcasts. and we're going back to the days of the original Dutch Mantel. I know everybody out there is going, wait a minute, we know who Dutch is, but we're not talking about the Dutch that everybody out there knows as Dutch Mantel. We're going to be talking about Alfred de la Rigardo, born in Dykirk, Luxembourg in 1881, and he arrived in America in 1900. And this guy's life is a truly amazing story. And to find out more about him, you can Google him, but when you Google him, you got to Google the original Dutch Mantel, or you're going to get our Dutch that we're all familiar with. So that's just the beginning of this ride, man. It's going to take my grandfather into the traveling carnivals for his first paid wrestling experience. And he was turned on to them by, obviously, the original Dutch Mantel. And that's where Roy's going to wrestle from anywhere from 3 times to 10 times a day. Not against other wrestlers, but with challengers from the crowd, the Carnival's crowd. Mm-hmm. So then we're going to pick up where we left off last Studcast with that one-night tournament and me versus Lou Thesz in the finals. And we're going to ride into Mobile's 10,000-seat main arena in this one, man. We're going to see who's going to meet Harley Race for the NWA World Championship and who's going to walk away with the 10 pounds of gold. And we'll also talk about the TV show that promoted the NWA World Championship match, the results of all the matches and the attendances in the Southeastern Gulf Coast territories, 3 largest cities, as we usually do. And if we got enough time after all that, Dave, we're going to have another learning tree question.
Oh, good deal. This sounds like another fantastic Studcast following 2 record setters in a row. So take us to Amarillo, Texas, where your grandfather Roy was about to meet one of the meanest wrestlers in the history of the sport. Lay it out for us.
All right, my man. And, when I say the meanest wrestlers in the history of the sport, if people Google him and they find this original Dutch Mantel, wait till you see this dude's picture. Wow. It says it all. So the original Dutch Mantel taught my grandfather Roy to wrestle. Basically, from about 1921 to 1924, Roy went and worked out with the original Dutch Mantel, but not before on 2 occasions. First 2 times that Roy went, he got his wrist broke on the first workout. He was gone until his wrist got well. He came back, and on the second workout, he got his ribs broken. So, that was done on purpose. Back in the old days, the wrestlers didn't want to train people. They didn't want anybody being in the business that they didn't know that, could keep their mouth shut and could handle what the business was all about, So after his training, they wanted to make sure, Dutch wanted to make sure that Roy had the guts and a true desire to be a wrestler. And that's what everybody did. From then all the way into the 70s and 80s, you treated people that wanted to be wrestlers with, you found out if they had respect and what kind of person they were before you would train them. Mm. So Dutch had worked for many years, man, he didn't want to train anybody, so he took the place, where many shooters that wrestlers would carry that really hurt you. He was the type of shooter, obviously, that did nothing but train you to how to hurt people, to learn the true shooting concept that that day is totally gone now. So today I'm going to tell the story. My grandfather told me that when I was about 12 years old, one of those rides to Memphis, about the strangest relationship between wrestling and the traveling carnivals.
I remember a number of months ago, I asked you, wait a minute, there are 2 Dutch Mantels, right? And you said yes. So my question is, the Dutch Mantel we all know came from the Dutch Mantel your grandfather knew. Is that correct?
Well, not exactly. The Dutch Mantel we all know, real name is Wayne Cowan. And Wayne asked my father when Dutch started wrestling, and he wrestled for me in the Southeastern Territory starting about 1974, early 1975, as partners with a guy from England that was his partner, and he was wrestling as Wayne Cowan. And so Wayne, my dad came and visited us one time, and, Dutch sat down with my dad, and, he said, I don't like my name, and I need to have a different type of name. Do you have any suggestions? He basically said, can you recommend a better name for me? A name that would be more fitting as a wrestler. So Dad told him the story of the real Dutch Mantell and how he trained Roy to wrestle, and basically the rest is history. That's how Wayne Cowan became Dutch Mantell. So Roy, after surviving 2 years training with the original Dutch Mantell, he traveled for the next 2 years in 1923 and part of 1924 with Carnival around Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, out in that area. And obviously he spent every day and every night wrestling against any person from the Carnival crowds that challenged him. And if they won, I think they told me they got $5, which, didn't sound like much back in the time I got this story in the 50s. But it was a lot of money way back in the 1900s or early 1900s. So he told me, he said, I wasn't the only wrestler on the traveling troupe on the Carnival. And he said the Carnival was a big one. And he said there were 2 other wrestlers with him every day. And they would go out on the bally.
Okay, I got to get educated here. What is a bally?
Well, a bally was kind of like a stage, and it was out in front of the big tent where inside the tent the wrestling ring was located, okay? So a man called the Barker, he would announce to the crowd all the information about what went on inside the tent behind him, and the 3 wrestlers would stand up on the bally on the stage with him, and they were the guys that were going to accept challenges from anybody in the crowd. Mm-hmm. So Roy was not a huge guy. In the early 20s, Roy was only 5'8", and about 150 pounds, he said, when he was wrestling on the bally. So he was by far the smallest of the 3 wrestlers that were up there on the stage. But because of Dutch Mantell had trained him, man, he was the toughest of the 3. He was the best of the 3. They had not been trained by a guy like Dutch Mantell. So Roy said every time they went up on the bally, and they were up there during the day, and then they'd go back at night again and do these things, that the Carnival Barker would make the announcement for the challengers. And because Roy was the smallest of the 3 wrestlers, he always got the first challenger, Nobody picked the big guys, obviously. So they wanted to say, I can beat that little shorter one there. Yeah. So many times he said he got the only challengers, especially when the men faced, twice his size, and what he would do is he would have these people, big old guys, anybody wanted to make the challenge good, and he had them all screaming. So, it was like, wow. But he said the guys, obviously the crowd thought, well, I wonder how tough the big guys are if the little one is this bad. So then the Carney Barker and the Carnival people were called Carnies. So the Carney Barker, he did his best to find all 3 of them a challenger when he did these things. But most times Roy had more than one challenger because he was obviously the smallest. So then once the challenges were made, then the tickets were sold to the crowd, and then everybody went into the tent in the back for the action.
Your grandfather was more than a foot shorter than you are and weighed probably half of what you weighed, even back in your day.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. He was a lot shorter than me, and as I got older and older, the distance kept getting greater and greater. So, that's correct, and normally every generation gets a little bigger than the generation before it. I'm bigger than my dad. My dad was bigger than his dad. Mm-hmm. And so that was 50 years ago and 2 generations ago. And as an example, I got a grandson that may be going to be bigger than me. So he's already there practically at 16. So no doubt he's going to probably be bigger than me.
This is great stuff, Stud. When we talk about at the beginning of the show, how your family started the profession of wrestling over 100 years ago, this is what we're talking about right now. And I think that is so cool. All right. Did he always win? And how many times was he beat?
Well, I actually met one myself, and he told me, and I'm very sure this is true. He said he never got beat, and he said there were a few times when someone, would throw an unexpected sucker punch. Somebody would be wrestling, so they were supposed to be wrestling, and the guy would try to knock him out. And then if he could cover him and they would have to count him out, then he could win the money. But he said, a couple of times that happened, but it didn't make any difference. He never lost, and he beat him anyway. So I asked if any of the other wrestlers lost, and then what happened when they did. So he said that they were immediately fired on the spot. He said, as soon as that event was over, then the head carnies came in and they said, you're gone. And so I would say, well, where did they get the next guy? And Roy said, well, the guy that beat him is the guy they went and got. So he said that's how they improved, getting tougher and tougher guys that got beat. They would just take the guy that won and say, hey, you travel with us and we'll make you some money, dude. So It was kind of like a dog-eat-dog world, man. That's what it was about. So this is just the first part of the story. And now I want to get to that strange relationship between wrestlers and the carnies themselves. And since he was traveling with them for more than a year, he learned their language.
Okay, what do you mean by their language? I mean, did they have their own way of talking? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they certainly did. They had their own way, Dave, of talking, and they spoke in their own language. They called it Carney language, and they could talk to each other right in front of people, and nobody could recognize a single word of what they were saying. So almost all the old wrestlers back at that time, and the next generation of wrestlers behind them even, because the old wrestlers like Roy learned to talk Carney. He learned to speak Carney. And then he would talk to his wrestlers when he was running his own company. And if there was anybody around, he didn't want them to know what he was talking about. He would speak Carney to his wrestlers. So it meant not just Roy's generation, but the next generation of my dad and Lester and that generation, they spoke Carney as well. So, in fact, that's where the word kayfabe comes from. It comes from carnival times. So it basically meant, when you said kayfabe, anybody was around, it usually meant to shut up if somebody was nearby, if you didn't want them to know what you were saying.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty interesting hidden history that you're talking about there, right there, and a really fascinating lesson in so many ways. I'm sure very few people know anything about this lesson. So do you have any idea what you're going to be talking about in the next hidden history lesson?
Yeah, I mean, since we've started here with the carnies, and back in Roy's day, before he actually went to Ohio and became a star, I think we're going to continue with Roy's next step into the wrestling world. And then after the Carnivals, Roy had trained with one of the greatest shooters in wrestling history for years. He was sent, and had been sent to the Carnivals, and then Thesz decided, Roy said, I'm done with the Carnivals, and, I want to go further. So Thesz said, I think you're ready to become a pro. So at 23 years old, my grandfather was sent from Texas, out there around Amarillo, Texas, to wrestle in Ohio. To Columbus, Ohio, as a matter of fact. It was one of the very first territories that was ever started. And man, oh man, was he in for a rude awakening.
I love it. So we're going to ride east with your grandfather to become a member of an extremely rare group of individuals, professional wrestlers in the 1920s. Are you kidding? I tell you, these Studcasts are really rocking, Ron. So before we go to our break, I can't wait any longer. Who is on the card for the world title night? Let's go to Mobile, Alabama. Back into closer to real time. February 26, 1980. Set it up for us.
Well, man, this card was truly loaded, man. About as loaded as you can get a wrestling card. The opening match was Roy Lee Welch against the Big C. Charlie Cook was facing Don Fargo. The United States Junior Heavyweight Championship was on the line. Champion Tony Charles was defending against Crazy Randy Rose at that time. There was a Southeastern Tag Championship match. Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin, they were the new Southeastern champions. They were defending against my brother Robert and Eddie Boulder. Then for the Southeastern Championship, the champion Mongolian Stomper, managed by Don Carson, was taking on Joe Leduc. But this time they were going to be in an I Quit match where the loser had to give up or say he quit over the building's PA system so that everybody in the building heard it. And, knowing these two guys, Stomper and Leduc, I mean, who's going to actually do that, man? So that was going to be the next match. And then the last match was for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Was Harley Race, and he was defending against me. I had won the tournament against Thesz the week before, so Harley was defending against me.
So he was going to defend the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against you.
That's it.
Wow, that's an amazing card. 4 championship matches, the last of which was for the 10 pounds of gold, owned by the world's best, the one and only Harley Race. That is so awesome. So that sets us up perfectly for the last part of this Studcast as we get into the second half. When we return after the break, we'll take that now. We'll be discussing one of the biggest nights, not only in Southeastern history, but in wrestling history, period. That's coming up when the break continues on this Studcast. Great news, Southeastern Gulf Coast fans. The Tennessee stud Ron Fuller is returning to Alabama in Ozark at the Ozark Civic Center Saturday, March 23rd for the XWX Turmoil event and escorting one of the stars to the ring. Wildcat Wendell Cooley and Scott Armstrong will also be there. The stud will be there at 6 p.m. when doors open to meet and greet fans from all over Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. He'll also have Southeastern t-shirts for only $10, pictures, stud t-shirts, and his bestseller book, Brutus. And the stud is looking forward to taking selfies with the fans. Make your plans now to shake hands with the Tennessee stud. Saturday, March 23rd, Ozark Civic Center. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back. The second half of this Studcast, which is already history-making as we've been talking about wrestling from 100 years ago and the stud's grandfather. All right, stud, so let's go to the TV show. You can set the scene for the huge event that's going to be 4 nights later, Mobile, Alabama. I think earlier we said the date was going to be 1980, like February 27th, I think it was. So let's go to Mobile. This one had to be one of the most important TVs you had ever put together.
Well, yeah, it certainly was, man. No doubt about it. I mean, this was really, really an important event because we had only been down there for 2 years, and we didn't have world champion come through very often. And wow, this was an opportunity, I felt, to really, really do something spectacular. So this TV opened up with Charlie Platt. First, he was telling everybody that this was the last week of these championship matches because we were in that rating period of February. This was going to be the last week of a championship match on TV, and in the one today on this show was going to be the Mongolian Stomper defending his Southeastern heavyweight belt. So plus we were going to be hearing, he said, from the NWA World Champion Harley Race for the first time live via telephone from Toronto, Canada. So then the new Southeastern Tag Champions, Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin, they brought their belts to the set for the first TV match. It was featuring their challengers. The first match was going to be Robert Fuller and Eddie Boulder. You know, we're on this huge card coming up against Norvell and Jimmy. for the Southeastern Championship on that Tuesday night. It was in 1980, you're correct. Mobile's not just the municipal auditorium, but the main arena, which was a big difference. It was the biggest structure on that whole complex.
Yeah, I think I said the 27th. It was actually February 26th. You're right on that. So I thought you never mentioned big cards in the general portion of a TV.
Well, normally we didn't, but I decided that this time, because Harley was only going to be in one city and not back for a long time, and I knew whatever match they had, it was going to be a tremendous match. Wanted as many people to see it as possible. And when we had been almost selling out all three of our major cities each week anyway at this point, this event was going to be in such a huge building that it was going to be so fantastic. I was hoping to lure some fans from the Dothan area, the Montgomery area, when they watched this TV show, to get in their car and come to Mobile to see it for themselves. And I knew that if they did, they were going to go home and they were going to tell everybody about how good this night was. So it was just a great way to build the territory. So then Golden and Austin, they're at the set with the Charlie, and they're in rare form, man, bragging about their flashy newly won tag team belts. They were telling Charlie that Eddie Boulder, who was in the ring with Rob, they said, there's a guy that he's way out of his league next Tuesday night when we defend the belt to get Robert Fuller and him in Mobile. And they said, and we're going to prove that to you, man. You're going to see that for certain. So he didn't, look at his league. He certainly didn't look at his league in the TV match that was going on while they were saying all this. Robert and Boulder looked like, they look like champions instead of what Jimmy and Norvell were looking at. Eddie Boulder was shining, basically, about the time all this is being said. And Rob and them looked great. And they ended their match, man. They had a beautiful tag team move that I'd never seen before. They must have set this up and talked about it a long time. And they ended up winning, pinning both their opponents at the same time off of that same move. So the second TV segment had Tony Charles and his United States Junior Heavyweight belt at the set with him. And Randy Rose, his next opponent, was in the ring at this point. And Rose was headed for the top of the cards, man. He had really worked his way up, especially with all these matches with the Wrestling Pro. And so at this point, he was really becoming a pretty decent star. And it was obvious by Tony's comments that he was impressed with Rose. He was like, wow, this kid is becoming something spectacular. So, however, Tony got very upset toward the end of the match because Rose used one of those clotheslines again. And this time he did it a little differently. He hit his opponent with a clothesline, not one time, but twice. So after he clotheslined him the first time, and he could have beat him right then, he got the guy up on his feet and shot him in the ropes. And then when he went to clothesline him the second time, he ran toward him and he clotheslined him through the ropes and out in the concrete. It was like, son of a gun. It looked like he killed the guy.
Wow.
And so the referee got angry about it. He didn't need to do that. And he kind of got in Rose's face before he started counting the young wrestler out. And then he had to raise Rose's hand because he won the match. But that wasn't enough for Randy, So he went out on the floor to get the guy who's laying there. He's not even moving. And so then Tony Charles sitting, 30 feet away. And, so he went straight for Rose. And Rose saw him coming. He jumped back in the ring. And he invited Tony to come on in. You could hear him screaming at him, come on, get you some, old man. Called him an old man. That wasn't good. That was not a smart move. So he stayed out. Tony didn't go in. He didn't get suckered into that. He stayed out and he helped the young kid get up. Finally got him up off the floor. But wow, Rose was becoming a killer.
Okay. I think Jim Croce was the one who said, you don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit in the wind, you don't pull the mask off the old Lone Ranger, and you don't call the dude an old man. All right.
Don't call Tony Charles an old man.
I remember how devastating those clotheslines looked back in the day, especially when Rose started doing them with Dennis Condrey, when the original Midnight Express was taking shape a couple of years later. All right, so let's move to the personality profile. Set that one up for us.
Yeah, it was a very special one, Dave. Charlie and I were sitting in the personality profile chairs at the normal place where the set was located. And between us was this small table, and it had a telephone sitting on it. And that had never been on the profile before, and we'd never done anything like that. So for the first time ever, Charlie was going to have a guest caller at the end of the profile. So its profile started with me and Charlie watching the last match from the big tournament in Mobile the Tuesday before that, in which I beat Thesz in the finals of the tournament, and I was going to end up wrestling Harley for the NWA championship on this coming Tuesday, the next Tuesday. So Charlie showed the last 5 minutes of this match between Thesz and I, which was 45 minutes long. It was a long match, and there were 9,000 people in attendance that night. We were in the main arena in Mobile, and that was a big building. And for the last 5 minutes of this match, fans were going crazy, and Lou and I were ending up, we basically had a classic clean wrestling match, which you didn't see much, especially not 45-minute ones. And Lou was not familiar with the Fuller leg lock that my dad had invented many years ago. And at the end of the match, I was lucky enough to get my Fuller leg lock on him at the end of the match. Otherwise, I couldn't have beat Thesz. But I could beat anybody with a hat hold, and he had never seen it, so he wasn't expecting it, and he didn't know how to defend against it.
Yeah.
So then Charlie showed an interview with Thesz that was made immediately following that match, after we had that 45-minute match, and I just beat Lou with the Fuller leg lock. Then they took the cameras into the dressing room, and Lou made an interview, and he put me and my family over big time. It was unreal. He talked about my grandfather, Roy, and he talked about Roy's brother, Herb, who was at one time the world junior heavyweight champion, and he stayed undefeated for 5 years, Herb, with that championship until he had a car wreck, and they had to give the title up. So Lou knew all that history, and Lou admitted that he had never seen the hole that I just beat him with in the ring, And he said, but I'm not surprised because this is the third generation of this Welch family, And he says, I'm not surprised at all that Ron's father invented this hole. And he said, it worked so well on me because he says Ron's father was 6'3", almost 6'4". He had long legs, and he goes, Ron's legs are a lot longer than that. He said, and you have to have long legs to make that hole work. So he said, and quite honestly, it was a great interview. He said when he hooked it on me and he rolled me on my back, and there I was with both my legs sticking up in the air, he said, I realized he had caught me in an inside toe hold. He goes, I knew the hold, but I'd never seen it done that way. And he said, that hold was one of the best wrestling holds in the world. You could make anybody give up with it. And he said, and he got it using a totally different new technique. So he said, since I'd never seen it done that way, there was no way, he said, I could even crawl to the ropes because we're both laying on our backs with our legs connected. You're dragging two people to the ropes. And he said, I figured out pretty quick, I can't get to the ropes. And then he said, and then when he started applying the pressure, he said, I knew right then, he says, this is not only an inescapable hold, but he can break my leg. And he said, I gave up right then. And I said, I know the hold, and you can break people's legs with it. So he finished in this interview by wishing me good luck the following week, basically. And he said, Again, he said, I wish Ron good luck next week because he's wrestling. In my opinion, I've got tremendous respect for probably one of the greatest NWA world champions ever, Harley Race. And he said, if I tell you this right now, and during the interview, finished the interview, he says, I tell you this right now, if he gets that hold on Harley Race, he's going to be the next world heavyweight champion.
Wow. So the former heavyweight champion, Lou Thesz, said all of this about you, your family, and the match that you just had. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it blew me away. I mean, I'm sitting there. I hadn't seen what he said. This was my first chance to see it. So I figured, he was going to make some kind of interview, maybe put me over some for the match. But I had no idea, what he said until I saw this tape. It was like, wow, it was unreal how good he put me over. So like everybody else watching, and wrestling's all wrestlers all over the world, I had great respect for Lou Thesz. I mean, Lou Thesz had real class, maybe as much or more so than any of our world champions. He was a class act. So then Charlie said, Ron, now we've got somebody on the phone here. And he said, he's been on phone for the whole time here. There's a speaker on this phone. He could hear that interview from Lou Thesz. And he said he's also heard everything that's been said since we sat down here. And he's in Toronto, Canada, and he's going to be wrestling you next Tuesday night. And he says, Harley Race wants to speak to you, Ron. So next thing, man, here comes that old raspy, deep down, gravelly voice of Harley came on, and he said, first thing out of his mouth, he said, Ron Fuller, this is your worst nightmare, Harley Race. And he said, I just heard what Lou Thesz had to say about you and your daddy's hold. And he says, I'm going to make you a promise. You're never going to get that hold on me. And then he said, I keep records about my best opponents. I never knew this either. He said, I keep records on my best opponents. And he said, I looked you up, and he said, you and I, over a period of the last 7 years, have had 7 world championship matches in 4 different states and 1 Texas death match. And you've only won one of those matches, the Texas death match, and it wasn't for the 10 pounds of gold. He said, you're not going to get that hold on me that you beat Thesz with or win my belt. He said, because, he says, I'm not that good old guy Lou Thesz is. He says, we're not going to have a clean old all-American wrestling match like you and Lou must have had. He said, we're going to get down and dirty.
Oh, my God.
You're going to have to hurt me. He said, worse than a broken leg to make me quit. So I cut him off at that point. I'd heard enough. I mean, I didn't expect him to be there anyway. Mm-hmm. So I told him, I said, you're right about those 7 world championship matches with me. And I reminded him, I said, I got to remind you that you only beat me in one of them. And that was the very first one that we ever had. It was in 1973 in Miami, Florida. And I was only 25 years old. Mm-hmm. And I said, and now I'm 32 years old. And I just beat probably the best world champion of all time, Lou Thesz.
Wow.
Now, this is my 8th try at your belt. And this is going to be the biggest win of my life. And the studio crowd popped, man. They exploded.
Yeah.
So, and then I said, I'm ready for this one. I've never tried to get that hold on you. But if I can do it to Thesz, I can damn sure do it to you, Harley. So I got another pop from the studio.
I bet. God.
So then he comes back on at the end, and he was a lot madder and when he came back on than he was during the first part of this interview. And he said, we've never wrestled down there on the Gulf Coast. He said, I'm going to make you and every one of those rednecks listening down there a promise. He said, you're going to lose in the middle of that ring next Tuesday night because he says, I'm still the greatest wrestler on God's green earth.
Wow. That is one of the best personality profiles I think I've ever heard. I bet those 10,000 seats were not going to be enough to hold them all after that. Wow. So how do you follow that, Stud? What was next?
Well, Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin, who were in the opening of the show, were there in the third segment, but they were taking their new tag belts out there, and they were actually wrestling on the third match of the show. And the studio crowd was so angry with their cockiness, man, especially they went out and they had two young guys, and they chewed these guys up, and literally at the end of it, they spit on them, and then they came back in the very last match, which was the Stomper defending his championship. They're going to be defending against Charlie Cook, which is a heck of an opponent for him. And, so out comes not just Don Carson with the Stomper, but Jimmy and Norvell came back because they knew they had pissed off the crowd so bad they were just, they wanted to get more heat. They couldn't stand just getting a little bit. So Charlie Cook gave the Stomper a real run for his money and his belt, man. At the end of the match, when him and the Stomper were kind of fighting each other and switching each other down the ropes, Golden and Austin drew the referee's attention. That's all Don Carson needed, man, just an opportunity, and he reached in there and jerked Charlie Cook's legs out from underneath him. Stomper covered him, and Carson dove on his legs. The referee didn't see Carson at all, just counted him out. Thought that, he was down for the pin.
Wow, so another great TV. All four upcoming championship matches, of course, we're focused on. I can't wait for the next part. So what happened in Mobile the following Tuesday night?
Well, Big C got the best of Roy Lee Welch in his match. Charlie Cook won over Don Fargo. In the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship match, Randy Rose beat Tony Charles and won Tony Charles' United States Heavyweight Championship. Did not expect that. I'm sure no one in the crowd expected that to happen. In the Southeastern Tag Championship match, the champions, Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin, they pinned Eddie Boulder, and they retained their championship. So then in the Southeastern Championship I Quit match, the Big C came out to manage the Stomper instead of Don Carson. And the Big C got the microphone and said, Don Carson is sick and he couldn't be here, and I'm going to take his place tonight. And you can imagine how that got over.
Did he sound like Don Carson a little bit? Just a little bit?
Or look like Don Carson, and he had the black glove on, too.
Right.
So, everybody knew who the heck it was.
Yeah.
So at the end of the match, so when the referee got knocked down accidentally, Joe ended up with his bear hug on the Stomper. So Big C, referee's down. Big C just comes in the ring behind Leduc's back. He loads up his glove, and he hits Joe Leduc in the back of the head with his glove, and down he went, and Big C crawled out of the ring again. And so then the Stomper had to bodily pick up Leduc and put him in a bear hug. So when the referee got up, he sees that the Stompers got Leduc in a bear hug, and he goes over and he raises Leduc's arm 3 times, and 3 times he drops it because Big C had knocked him cold with his loaded glove. So the referee stopped the match and he declared the Stomper the winner. Now, Leduc didn't say I give up, but he couldn't say I give up. He was unconscious, so referee couldn't continue that. So he did the only thing he did.
I bet the crowd went crazy on that.
Yeah, well, it was Mobile, man, and we both know what that means. Crazy crowd anyway. And thankfully, the building was so packed with people that they had a hard time getting to the ring if they'd want to have a riot, and it was just crammed.
I'm sorry, folks. We don't have room for rioting tonight. Wow. All right. So move to the big one. Your match with the one and only Harley Race.
Well, it was a 1-hour time limit match, and probably of these, this is the 8th match I had with him. It was probably the best match we'd ever had together. And I kept going for my Fuller leg lock through the entire match, and Harley kept getting away, just barely getting away. They'd get to the ropes, and then he would get out on the floor. And, then he spent a lot of time getting out of the ring, killing time, staying outside as long as he could, stalling, and that got tremendous heat, man. I mean, the fans wanted to get him, but, he wouldn't give me the opportunity to get that hold on him. So around the 45-minute mark, I busted him up, and he was bleeding, and it was 5 minutes left. With 5 minutes left in the match, the timekeeper started calling out the last 5 minutes of the match. He counted down the minutes. It was 5 minutes to go, then a minute later, 4 minutes to go. Everybody in the building was on its feet. During this 5 minutes, I kept getting these near pins, and he would barely kick out, and then another one, and another one. And then went down to the last minute, and about the last minute of the minute left, he stopped me, picked me up to body slam me. I dropped down behind him, and I hooked the hole, man. That building erupted. It exploded.
Wow.
So Harley was right in the middle of the ring. Desperately, he looking around, and he sees that, he saw what the Thesz saw. Thesz went ahead and gave up, but Harley being Harley, he wasn't going to go that way.
Yeah.
So he was right in the middle of the ring, and he's trying to drag us both backwards, grabbing hands full of the mat and trying to drag us to get to the ropes. And then finally he ended up couldn't get there. And he was just flailing with his arms, man. The announcer started counting down the last 10 seconds. And the crowd was so loud that I literally didn't know if he had given up or not when the bell rang.
Wow.
Because I couldn't hear. You couldn't hear the bell, basically. So the referee then had to pull us apart. Because when you got that hold on, you can't really separate your legs from the guy that you've got it on. So he has to kind of untangle our legs. And I got up first, obviously, and I had my hand in the air. The building exploded. They thought, like I did, that I'd won the world championship.
Right.
And Harley's still laying there. He couldn't move, man. He was just laying there. He was laying on one side, and he was furiously rubbing his right leg. That was the leg that you put the hold on.
Mm-hmm.
So the referee pulled my hand down, told the announcer to tell everybody that the match was a 1 hour time limit draw.
God. Man, okay. Still, it's a great ending to a phenomenal night of wrestling. So attendance had to be through the roof.
Well, Montgomery and Dothan, I'm going to tell all three like we normally do. Montgomery and Dothan's house dropped a little bit because, they had I think some of the fans actually came from Montgomery that would have been in that house there in Montgomery. They came to Mobile.
Yep.
So that house dropped a little bit from 4,800 down to 4,500. Dothan's house dropped a little bit from 49 down to 46. I think hopefully some people came from Dothan as well. And, but for the first time in this big building, now we were in the main arena that held 10,100 people. We sold out. We actually had the actual announced attendance was 10,300.
Yeah.
So in those three cities that week, on the Monday through Friday, we had 19,400 fans in 3 shows, which was a new all-time Southeastern record, either in Knoxville or down there on the Gulf.
That's incredible. All right, the cards were the same in all 3 markets except for that match that was going to happen in Mobile.
Yeah.
All right. So did you go pay Harley that night like you did the first sellout in Knoxville history with him? Because to me, I think that's one I remember. I will always remember that what I thought was a very personal moment with only you and only the world champion in the dressing room.
Well, yeah, and I did. I waited. We were obviously in the last match. It lasted an hour. There was hardly anybody in the dressing room anyway. And, And, this card had the kind of same raised prices as that one in Knoxville that we had in 1977 that set the all-time crowd record in that building. It's still a record today. So this crowd, though, because this building held 10,000, was almost twice as big as the Coliseum in Knoxville. So after I showered, there was almost no one in the building at that point, and especially nobody in his dressing room. And I took $100 bills. I had sent Roy up to the box office to bring me his money in cash. Mm-hmm. And I took $100 bills again, just like I'd done in Knoxville, into his dressing room. And when I went in there, he was hobbling on his leg. Mm-hmm. And I apologized, for being stiff. I said, and it kind of as a joke, I said, the crowd made me do it.
Right.
Yeah, well, I was trying to make a joke out of it, but I knew that, I was excited and I really hurt him a little bit. So
was his pay similar to what you had in Knoxville?
Well, I counted them out. I counted out $100 bills to him, one at a time, into his hand, same way I had done it in Knoxville.
Right.
But this time it had a little bonus to it because it was more than the 20. I had counted out $100 bills to him in Knoxville, which was $2,000.
Right.
This time it was 40 $100 bills.
Whoa.
$4,000. Now in today's money, that was $16,000. Right. I mean, it's a pretty good payoff.
Yeah, for one match.
Yeah, and then when I finished up, when I finished counting them out to him, he smiled and he said, funny thing, Ron, he goes, my leg don't hurt anymore.
Oh, my God, that's classic. Wow.
So we had kind of set the template, man, for world title matches in that territory down there. Exactly, basically, as we had done in that first one in 1977 in Knoxville. This 1 hour, 60-minute time limit Broadway match.
Yeah.
These matches they just make your territory, they build your territory better than any type of match you can possibly have. Fans watch this for an hour and they go home saying, my God, how can people do that?
Yeah.
How can anybody do that? Right. So it was a great way to end the night.
Wow, no doubt. So obviously Harley had to be feeling a little better after 40 $100 bills, but he was feeling it the next day because I bet you were too.
Yeah, I mean, you don't do it. You don't have those kind of matches and get up the next morning and ready to roll.
But it was so much more than just one match for Harley Race because what you got was every bit of Harley with the promos, everything that led up to the match, the way he sold you just over and over, or any opponent, that he was that professional.
And one more thing I need to add to Carly's credit, Dave, that probably was not the only hour he did that week.
Wow.
He probably did 3, maybe 4 of those that week.
Defending his title.
Defending his title with other guys around the country.
Wow.
Other great wrestlers.
Wow.
Amazing stuff.
God, this has been a tremendous Studcast and appropriately named Carnivals, Characters, and Harley Race. All right, after all this, we will have time for a learning tree question, Ron, so let's get to that. I'm glad we do because we've got a great one for you this time, Stud. It has to do with Harley Race. Howard Hawkins, Joplin, Missouri, says, close to where Harley was born, he asked if you know anything about Harley Race's car accident in 1961 that killed his wife and almost killed Harley Race.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, I do. Mr. Hawkins, what a great question, and to me, this is probably one of the best stories about how tough Harley Race was as a human being. I mean, this car wreck deal. And his whole life, Harley's whole life was really a story of just downright determination as a human being. He had polio as a boy, and he was very weak as a child. And after struggling for years to get his strength, he started wrestling. He actually started wrestling professionally at 15 years old. So, he was an amazing person.
Wow.
So then he once told me this story that, the first territory that he ever worked in was Tennessee. And it was working for my grandfather, Roy. And he told me how much he admired Roy and her. He said, your family members were unbelievable. He goes, wow, they treated me great. I'm just a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid there, So he said he met his first wife in Tennessee during this time frame, and he married her, and she became pregnant about the time he was getting ready to leave. So he had wrestled for this guy in St. Joseph, Missouri, a promoter named Karras. Gus Karras is his name. Mm-hmm. And he had started wrestling in the business for Gus Karras. And Gus had called him, and he'd been in Tennessee for a couple of years, and he said, why don't you come home? I want you to wrestle for me here, And he goes, I'm sure you've gotten a lot better. So he gave Roy and them a notice, and they were leaving territory, him and his wife, to return home to the state. It was in 1961. He was only 18 years old at this point. Mm. So him and his bride are leaving Tennessee on their way home to Missouri. And they were pretty close to his father's home. He told me this story, and he says a big truck sideswiped him, man, in a big snowstorm. Ooh. So both he and his pregnant wife were pronounced dead at the scene of the accident.
Wow.
Both of them. And as they were being carried to the funeral home, a guy that was in the car with him, the hearse with him, saw him move. He was like, I think he moved. Then they stopped and they went and checked on him. And so they took Harley to the hospital. But his wife and his baby were gone. They died. So he had tremendous injuries to both of his legs. And they had some upper body injuries as well. But a couple of days later, they had repaired as good as they could his left leg, which was really bad, but the right one was much worse. And they were preparing to amputate his right leg. They were going to take off his right leg. He's 18 years old, man. So the old promoter, Gus Karras, that had sent for him to come home, he didn't show up. He finally found him in this hospital. And they had already sedated Harley, and they were going to amputate his leg, take his leg off at the knee, from the knee down, his right leg. So Gus Karras finds out that he's in the operating room, and he just bolts in there, and he says, wait a minute. Now, he's already sedated. They're about to take his leg off. And Karras says, absolutely not. You don't touch it. Don't touch it, right? And so he told, the doctor, that you got to do your best to fix it up. You're not taking it off. You don't know this guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, mm-hmm. He's unbelievable. He's going to do something miraculous here, if possible. So he told the doctor told Harley, when he came to, and they went ahead and worked on and did what they could, the best they could with him there. He told him that you're going to be lucky if you ever walk again. And he says there's no chance. Harley asked him, well, what about wrestle? And he says there's absolutely no chance you're ever going to wrestle again. No chance. Right? So so Harley said, I told him, I tell you what, Doc, he goes, I'm going to send you some wrestling tickets to my first match when I get back in the ring. And by golly, that's what happened. So thanks for your question, Mr. Hawkins. I mean, They put 4 screws in Harley's right knee. He wore braces on both of his legs for 21 months after the surgeries. And as a man of his word, he sent his doctor 2 ringside tickets to his first match 2 years after the wreck.
So that is why Harley Race is the baddest man on God's green earth. Wow. You know, we recorded that story, and thanks for telling it again, because it reminded me, and I don't know if you told it exactly the same way, but we recorded that story about 2 years ago and put it on your YouTube Southeastern Rewind channel as a stud story about Harley Race. Every time I hear that story, obviously it's just a thing where you look back at this legend and you have to have more respect for the legendary Harley Race. Wow. It seems like I say this every week. Every week now, it seems like. These Studcasts have always been great, but somehow they keep getting better and better. I get chill bumps when you tell these Harley Race stories. That's just amazing. This one has something for everyone. Carnivals and their relationship to wrestlers. Characters like Harley Race. One of the greatest cards in wrestling history. All that led up to it. What happened during it and after it. And even an uplifting story on the end. So, where do we ride next week, Stud?
Well, there's going to be a surprise for everybody in the first week of March. We're going to be riding into the first week of March, 1980. There's going to be a new mass wrestler arriving in Southeastern. He's going to look very familiar to everybody, and he's going to have a strange name. He's going to call himself the Georgia Jawjacker. And he's going to be making his first ever appearance in Southeastern Gulf Coast. And right off the bat, he's going to get a shot at the Mongolian Stomper, the man who sent him away almost 3 months earlier. And then in our next hidden history lesson, we're going to follow Roy to where Dutch Mantell sent him to Ohio. We're going to begin the rest of Roy's life journey as a wrestler. As we get into this next real hidden history wrestling lesson, it's going to be a remarkable story, the beginning of a remarkable story.
Wow, 3 words. I can't wait. Hey, folks, you know the deal on Facebook. Find Ron at Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there and automatically become friends with a legend. On Twitter, now known as X also, he's at Ron Fuller Welch. You can follow him there too. Check out his fantastic website at tnstud.com. This Studcast will be there, and every Studcast ever done. This is number 339. So there are 339 of these Studcasts that are there. Everyone ever done. Shop the Stud Store too. You get 43 Super Studcast, 4 different 8x10 photos, the thrilling Lion novel, Brutus, personally autographed to you if you like, and T-shirts still on sale for $15.99. The kicker is it's all free shipping. Subscribe now at YouTube Southeastern Rewind and get the best in old school wrestling. 400 videos. 400 videos. The last 116 Studcasts, 52 stud stories, 103 short rides with the stud, and now 14 Ask the Stud question and answer shows that are filled with variety. I mean, a real variety of wrestling history. All of this exclusively YouTube, Southeastern Rewind, the best deal in old school wrestling. Simple to find. Go to YouTube, in the search bar, put in Southeastern Rewind, and boom, just like that, it's the first one that pops up. So you got to check it out. Don't forget those who live in the Gulf Coast area. Ron is going to be making an appearance in Ozark, Alabama's Civic Center. Saturday night, set this on your calendar. Saturday night, March 23rd of 2024. That's only a few Saturday nights away, along with Scott Armstrong and Wildcat Wendell Cooley at a great local wrestling card there. Stop by and say hello to the Tennessee Stud. Once again, Saturday night, March 23rd, Ozark Civic Center. Man, this has been a great one, Stud. Any final comments today?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming coming down there in your area again, Dave. It's been a couple of years since I've been down there, and sure would like to say hello to a lot of people in that area. I love that part of the country, and I want to thank everybody for their kind comments about the last few Studcasts. Been getting tremendous reaction about this Vince McMahon situation and how he threw the wrestling companies and the wrestling business under the bus. And thank everybody for your continued support. Feel free to tell your friends and neighbors about us, and take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC. Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.